Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to the Great Books course of Ubiquity University for our November and December lectures by Gyorgyi Szabo on Bertrand Russell's pursuit and meaning of happiness. What does happiness mean? And I was reminded of the great books just the other day when I saw a movie called Doctor Strange. And if you have the chance to watch this movie, Doctor Strange, it's an incredible treatment of many of the issues that we took up with Paramahansa Yogananda and the autobiography of a yogi. Remember when we started this trimester, we were contemplating what constitutes a miracle. And this movie that I saw, Doctor Strange, depicts the miraculous and its energetic body in a very, very profound way. And now we're transitioning to probably the greatest miracle of them all, happiness, the ultimate goal beyond which there is no higher value, said Aristotle. And many people have wrestled with this question, what is happiness? Because if you can find happiness, you find the ultimate value that human beings can acquire, can embody. So what is happiness is one of the greatest questions a person can ask. And answering it is the pursuit of a lifetime. So I am delighted to be able to introduce to you Gyorgyi Szabo, who's going to take old Bertrand Russell's intelligence on this question of happiness. Gyorgyi, welcome and all good wishes.
Thank you very much, Jim. Well, amongst all, we're going to discuss whether happiness is the ultimate thing in our lives. But first of all, I would like to send my warmest wishes to California and to those who are suffering in the midst of that awful fire. And I hope there will be no more fatalities and the firefighters, lots of warmest wishes to them. They are amazing. Now, I'm so happy to discuss happiness with you, Bertrand Russell's observation and experiences. What is happiness? Is it actually an abstraction of the mind? Is it something we generate within? Or is it something that is a byproduct of external things? Is the state of being, can we actually get hold of? Can we just cage it like a little bird and just really look after it? Why are we pursuing happiness in every waking and dreaming moments of our lives? Is it a if and then scenario happiness? If I buy this house, I will be happy. If I climb the mountain, I will be happy. If I buy that bag, I will be happy. If I drink that champagne, I will be happy. If I marry that woman or that man, I will be happy. But before we go into Bertrand Russell's view on all these, and I say before that it is a very dense and profound book, and it's impossible to discuss every single thought and ideas in it, but I picked a few that I would like to present to you and really see whether his observations are anything to do with our lives. And I will be very happy to hear your views on happiness. So before we jump into Bertrand Russell's life and his book, let me read something from the Dalai Lama. When he was asked about what surprised him the most, this is what he said: man, because he sacrifices his health to make money, then he sacrifices his money to recuperate his health. And he is so anxious of the future that he doesn't enjoy the present. The result being he doesn't live in the present or in the future. He lives as he is never going to die, and he dies having never lived. Now let's see for a few moments who Bertrand Russell was. He was born in 1872 and he lived 98 years. He was born in a very affluent aristocratic family in England. Unfortunately, he lost his mom when he was 2 years old, and he lost his dad when he was 4 years old. So after such unhappy events, his grandfather, who was a former prime minister of England, Earl Russell, he started to look after him and his siblings. Unfortunately, at the age of 6, the grandfather died, and the grandmother, Countess Russell, who was a Scottish Presbyterian religious conservative, looked after the little ones. Well, you can see that his upbringing was everything but happy. He did recount in some of his books that he had a very lonely and depressive upbringing. He was married 4 times. He married first time when he was 22. He had many and simultaneous lovers. And he became a very well-known and a prestigious philosopher who was lecturing in the London School of Economics, the UCLA, and lots of European and American universities. One of his PhD students became just as famous as he was by the name of Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was not just a philosopher and a mathematician, he was also a pacifist. And he was once imprisoned for passive resistance to military and naval service in the First World War. He went to Russia and he met with Vladimir Lenin. And he found Lenin very disappointing and opinionated, well, just like Russell is not or was not very opinionated. If you read this book, you will find Russell actually quite funny or witty. Check this out. Once when he was traveling to a conference or to a lecture, he was flying in a small airplane, which unfortunately crashed. And he was one of the 24 survivors. And he said that he owed his life to smoking, since the people who drowned were in a non-smoking part of the plane. In September 1961, at the age of 89, Russell was jailed again in Brixton prison for breach of peace after taking part in an anti-nuclear demonstration in London. The magistrate offered to exempt him from jail if he pledged himself to good behavior, to which Russell replied, "No, I won't." In 1962, Russell played a public role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. In an exchange of telegrams with the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, Khrushchev assured Russell that the Soviet government would not be reckless. So Russell sent a telegram to President Kennedy saying, "Your action, desperate. Threat to human survival. No conceivable justification. Civilized man condemns it. We will not have mass murder. Ultimatum means war, and this is madness." Russell and Einstein wrote a manifesto for nuclear disarmament and opposing the Vietnam War, suggested foreign troops withdrawal of Central Europe, as well as the Western recognition of the People's Republic of China. In terms of his work, he was particularly prolific in a field of metaphysics, the logic, and the philosophy of mathematics, the philosophy of language, ethics, and epistemology. When Brand Blanchard asked Russell why he did not write on aesthetics, Russell replied that he did not know anything about it. And now quoting, this is what he said, "But that is not a very good excuse. For my friend Stanley, it has not deterred me from writing on other subjects." Russell was the author of more than 60 books and over 2,000 articles. Additionally, he wrote many pamphlets, introductions, and letters to editors. One pamphlet titled, "I Appeal unto Caesar, the Case of the Conscientious Objectors," allegedly helped secure the release from prison of hundreds of conscientious objectors. For the most of his adult life, Russell maintained religion to be little more than superstition, and in spite of any positive effects, largely harmful to people. He believed that religion and the religious outlook serve to impede knowledge and foster fear and dependency, and to be responsible for much of our world wars, oppression, and misery. Russell argued for a scientific society where war would be abolished, population growth would be limited, and prosperity would be shared. He suggested the establishment of a single supreme world government, able to enforce peace, claiming that the only thing that will redeem mankind is cooperation. He was an active supporter of the homosexual law reform society, and in 1958, he wrote a letter to the Times calling for a change in a law regarding male homosexual practices, which were partly legalized in 1967 when Russell was still alive. In the postscript of his autobiography, titled Reflections on My 80th Birthday, this is what he wrote. I have lived in a pursuit of a vision, both personal and social. Personal, to care for what is noble, for what is beautiful, for what is gentle, to allow moments of insight to give wisdom at more mundane times. Social, to see in imagination the society that is to be created, where individuals grow freely and where hate and greed and envy die, because there is nothing to nourish them. These things I believe, and the world, for all its horrors, has left me unshaken. Now, let's get into his book. This book was published in 1961. It is in two parts. The first part discusses what are the causes of our unhappiness, and the second part is about what makes us happy. So today we're going to cover the first part, and as I mentioned to you, there's so much in it really. So I just picked a few things for our discussion today. Isn't it interesting when you meet somebody new perhaps, and you may ask, what's your name, where are you from, where you live, how many children you have, what you do for a living? Do you ever ask that person, are you happy? This is a very good point that Russell discusses. And he really goes to the heart of the issue. He says, the cure for the ordinary day-to-day unhappiness from which most people in civilized countries suffer, and which is all the more unbearable because, having no obvious external cause, it appears inescapable. I believe this unhappiness to be very mistaken habits of life and to do about the mistaken worldview. So these are the matters which lie within the power of the individual. So it is really, in his view, not about external things. He clearly had a very unhappy and depressed upbringing, and he often felt very suicidal. Later on in his life, he regarded his life as joyful because, he said, diminishing preoccupation with myself. Gradually, I learned to be indifferent to myself and my deficiencies. I came to center my attention increasingly upon external objects, the state of the world, various branches of knowledge, individuals for whom I felt affection. Now, let me mention a little side note here. I mentioned to you that he was married 4 times and he had many children. One of his children is by the name of Lady Catherine Tate, whose son is called Benjamin Tate. He was married to one of my friends. She is Italian. And I met Benjamin when I was living in Florence, Italy. When I met him, I thought, gosh, I know this person. He is the spit image of Bertrand Russell. And I was also told that despite his saying that, Russell saying that being affectionate, apparently he wasn't a great father. He wasn't a great grandfather. and not to mention a great husband. So this is just a little bit about Bertrand Russell's life. So those who are preoccupied with themselves and with narcissistic tendencies are all about admiring oneself and wishing to be admired. Does it ring a bell about our politicians, actors, and actresses? Let's see what he says. The tragedy of one successful politician after another is the gradual substitution of narcissism for an interest in the community and the measures for which he stands. The man who is only interested in himself is not admirable and is not felt to be so. Consequently, the man whose sole concern with the world is that it shall admire him is not likely to achieve his object. But even if he does, he will not be completely happy, since human instinct is never completely self-centered, and the narcissist is limiting himself artificially just as truly as is the man dominated by a sense of sin. The primitive man might be proud of being a good hunter, but he also enjoyed the activity of the chase. Vanity, when it passes beyond the point, kills pleasure in every activity for its own sake and thus leads inevitably to listlessness and boredom. Often its source is diffidence and its cure lies in the growth of self-respect. But this is only to be gained by successful activity inspired by objective interests. The megalomaniac differs from the narcissist by the fact that he wishes to be powerful rather than charming, and he seeks to be feared rather than loved. To this type belong many lunatics and most of the great men in history. Love of power, like vanity, is a strong element in normal human nature, and as such is to be accepted. It becomes deplorable only when it is excessive or associated with an insufficient sense of reality. When this occurs, it makes a man unhappy or foolish, if not both. This lunatic, who thinks he is a crowned head, may be, in a sense, happy, but this happiness is not of a kind that any sane person would envy. Alexander the Great was psychologically of the same type as the lunatic, though he possessed the talent to achieve the lunatic's dream. He could not, however, achieve his own dream, which enlarged its scope as his achievement grew. Then it became clear that he was the greatest conqueror known to fame. He decided that he was God. Was he a happy man? His drunkenness, his furious rages, his indifference to women, and his claim to divinity suggest that he was not. Well, I can't wait to hear Jim Garrison's comment on this, especially if we consider Donald Trump. Is he a narcissist or a megalomaniac or both? Can you actually be happy at the expense of another human being? Russell says that those unhappy people who feel they were deprived some sort of satisfaction in childhood set their lives to attain satisfaction and care less about anything else. Or those who want to escape from present and intoxicate themselves by drugs or alcohol, whatever mind-altering substance. Now, let's continue about Byronic happiness. Despite Russell says that he wasn't a religious man, I think to a certain degree he was a spiritual man. He kept saying that live in the present, enjoy the moment, because that is the end result is not the most important. The journey is just as important as the end result. The habit of looking to the future and thinking that the whole meaning of the present lies in what it will bring forth is a pernicious one. There can be no value in the whole unless there is value in the parts. Life is not to be conceived on the analogy of a melodrama in which the hero goes through incredible misfortunes for which they are compensated by happy ending. I live and have my day. My son succeeds me and has his day. His son, in turn, succeeds him. What is there in all this to make tragedy about? Let's see what he says about competition. If you ask people of what interferes with his or her enjoyment of life, they say the struggle for life. Russell believes that struggle for life is really struggle for success. What people fear when they engage in struggle is not that they will fail to get their breakfast next morning, but they will fail to outshine their neighbor. Here, obviously, he doesn't mean or doesn't refer to very poor people, but talks about mostly about affluent people in the Western Hemisphere. Material success guides towards happiness in our lives. Just check all the TV, the paper, and the internet, buy this, buy that, do this and do that, and you will be this person or that person who is very, very happy. You rent a big house, a big car, send your kids to the most expensive school, buy the most expensive presents to the spouse in compensation of not being present, but working to earn money to send more. This is a never-ending cycle. Rich people are more anxious about losing their riches than anything else. The Buddhist saying is, the bigger the house, the bigger the fear. Money made is accepted measure of our brains. Why is that so? A man who makes a lot of money is a clever fellow. A man who does not is not. Nobody likes to be thought a fool. So why are we measured by what possessions we have? Have you experienced that somebody is looked down upon only because he or she was not wealthy or well-dressed? The root of the trouble springs from too much emphasis upon competitive success as the main source of happiness. I do not deny that the feeling of success makes it easier to enjoy life. A painter, let us say, who has been obscure throughout his youth, is likely to become happier if his talent wins recognition. Nor do I deny that money, up to a certain point, is very capable of increasing happiness. Beyond that point, I do not think it does so. What I do maintain is that success can only be one ingredient in happiness and is too dearly purchased if all the other ingredients have been sacrificed to obtain it, just like the Dalai Lama's words. I'm sure that you have met lots of people in your life who were deprived of something in their childhood, and they set their mission to fill that hole what they had in their life. I had a friend, Hungarian girl, who was very poor as growing up. She moved to London, and she said to herself, one day I will become a dentist because I will be rich. She did become a dentist. She moved to the Emirates, and I know that she has 2 children. She has a huge mortgage. She has 2 nannies and housekeepers, and she never sees her children. I doubt that she is happy, but she achieved what she didn't have in her childhood. Now, the other element of unhappiness could be due to boredom or maybe too much excitement. Russell says that excitement is the opposite of boredom. One of the essentials of boredom consists in the contrast between present circumstances and some other more agreeable circumstances which force themselves irresistibly upon the imagination. It is also one of the essentials of boredom that one's faculties must not be fully occupied. Running away from enemies who are trying to take one's life is, I imagine, unpleasant, but certainly not boring. A man who would not feel bored while he was being executed unless he had almost superhuman courage. In the old days, after supper, When the wife and daughters had cleared away the things, everybody sat around and had what was called the happy family time. This meant that pater familias went to sleep, his wife knitted, oh my God, I just lost it, and the daughters wished they were dead or at Timbuktu. They were not allowed to read or to leave the room because the theory was that at that period their father conversed with them, which must be a pleasure to all concerned. Yeah, right. Imagine the monotony of winter in a medieval village. People could not read or write. They had only candles to give them light after dark. The smoke of their one fire filled the only room that was not bitterly cold. Roads were practically impossible, so that one hardly ever saw anybody from another village. It must have been boredom as much as anything that led to the practice of witch hunts as the sole sport by which winter evenings could be enlivened. We are less bored than our ancestors were, but we are more afraid of boredom. We have come to know, or rather believe, that boredom is not part of the natural lot of man, but can be avoided by a sufficiently vigorous pursuit of excitement. Girls nowadays earn their own living, very largely because this enables them to seek excitement in the evening and to escape the happy family time that their grandmother had to endure. Russell brings our attention to the rhythm of nature, which is essential to experience as we are creatures of the universe of which Earth is part of. It is profoundly satisfying to watch a sunset, to touch a tree, or play in the snow. Modern urban people suffer of boredom because of the feeling of being separated from Earth and its pleasures. A happy life must be, to a great extent, a quiet life, for it is only in the atmosphere of quiet that true joy can live. Russell said that the lives of great men has not been exciting except at a few great moments. Socrates could enjoy a banquet now and again and must have derived considerable satisfaction from his conversations while the hemlock was taking effect, but most of his life he lived quietly with Xanthippe, taking a constitutional in the afternoon and perhaps meeting a few friends by the way. Immanuel Kant is said never to have been more than 10 miles from Königsberg in all his life. Darwin, after going round the world, spent the whole of the rest of his life in his own house. Marx, after stirring up a few revolutions, decided to spend the remainder of his days in a British museum. Altogether, it will be found that a quiet life is characteristic of great men, and that their pleasures have not been of the sort that would look exciting to the outward eye. No great achievement is possible without persistent work, so absorbing and so difficult that little energy is left over for the more strenuous kinds of amusement, except such as serve to recuperate physical energy during holidays, of which alpine climbing may serve as the best example. There you go to the Alps. What did he say about fatigue? He thinks that tiredness is mostly to do with emotional tiredness. Not sleeping enough, rushing to work, producing great results at work, as fear of dismissal, fear of not earning enough, etc. In Russell's view, tiredness is due to worry, which could be prevented by a better philosophy of life. Most people are deficient of the control over their thoughts. In many cases, they worry when they cannot do anything about the situation. People take their worries to bed. They are going over and over their troubles when they should rest. And a quick little side note with regard to sleep. If you really want to read something amazing, this is the book to read. And this really talks about that, why we sleep and how important, beneficial to our health not just mentally, physically, and so on. And the biggest message of this book is about the integration and the reflection of what has happened in that particular day. But let's go on with Russell's thoughts. He rightly says that whatever you do in a universe would remain just as much whatever you do. Our doings are not so important as we naturally suppose. Our success and failures do not, after all, matter very much. Even great sorrows can be survived. Troubles which seem as if they must put an end to happiness for life fade with the lapse of time until it becomes almost impossible to remember their poignancy. But over and above these self-centered considerations is the fact that one's ego is no very large part of the world. The man who can center his thoughts and hopes upon something transcending self can find a certain peace in the ordinary troubles of life, which is impossible to the pure egoist. We know so much about the unconscious affecting the conscious, but the other way around, its influence, I mean that the conscious influence on the unconscious is very important as well. Worry is really about fear. And this is what I'm going to read is a very, very important point. And I must say that since I read the book, I have used this idea so often. This is what Russell said. When some misfortune threatens, consider seriously and deliberately what is the very worst that could possibly happen. Having looked this possible misfortune in the face, give yourself sound reasons for thinking that after all, it would be no such very terrible disaster. Such reasons always exist, since at the worst, nothing that happens to oneself has any cosmic importance. When you have looked for some time steadily at the worst possibility and have said to yourself with real conviction, well, after all, that would not matter so very much. But I would like to point out, I think, the very logical opposite. When we worry and we have this huge amount of fear, let's just not think about what the worst can happen, but what is the best that can happen too. Why is it that our mind or our psyche always centers upon the negative and not on the positive? Well, the other important part of unhappiness is envy. Instead of deriving pleasure of what one has, one derives pain what others have. That is envy. Sitting on a metro, a beautiful woman passes by. See how many women look at her with envy or with compliment or even mad. Do they look at her like, oh, I wish my wife was that beautiful? So what is the cure for envy? For the saint is the cure of selflessness. Though even in the case of saints, envy of other saints being saintlier is a possibility. What is more enviable than happiness? If I can cure myself of envy, I can acquire happiness and become enviable. If you desire glory, you may envy Napoleon, but Napoleon envied Caesar. Caesar envied Alexander, and Alexander, I dare say, envied Hercules, who never existed. You cannot therefore get away from envy by means of success alone, for there will always be in history or legend some person even more successful than you are. You can get away from envy by enjoying the pleasures that come your way, by doing the work that you have to do, and by avoiding comparisons with those whom you imagine, perhaps quite falsely, to be more fortunate than yourself. Do you think there is envy amongst animals? Does one flower envies the other's color? Or an ant colony envies the other colony's size? What role envy plays in the evolution of humanity? If nothing else than to realize that humans must enlarge their hearts as they have enlarged their minds. We must learn to transcend the self, and in so doing, to acquire the freedom of the universe. Now let's talk about the sin. The definition of a sin or sinning means something different according to religious belief systems or worldviews. Whatever community one chooses, if one acts against the community's morals, the community outcasts the sinner, causing a great unhappiness to the offender. Most of us wish to be saints, or only very few can be as such, and even those sometimes found out that in fact they are just as much sinners as ordinary people. Upbringing plays an important part of the formulation of one's moral codes. Presents say, don't swear, don't hit your sister, it is not nice forcefully taking your sibling's toy, don't lie, etc. Alcohol is okay because our Lord and the apostles drank wine, but no saints smoke, so smoking is bad. Is this a rational argument? Certainly not. Russell says that you should observe what you were taught and how you feel as an adult. Don't let yourself be dominated by others' thoughts and feelings. The man divided against himself looks for excitement and distraction. He loves strong passions, not for sound reasons, but because for the moment they take him outside himself and prevent painful necessity of thought. Any passion is to him a form of intoxication, and since he cannot conceive of fundamental happiness, all relief from pain appears to him solely possible in the form of intoxication. This, however, is the symptom of deep-seated malady. Where there is no such malady, the greatest happiness comes with the most complete possession of one's faculties. It is in the moments when a mind is most active and the fewest things are forgotten that the most intense joys are experienced. This, indeed, is one of the best touchstones of happiness. The happiness that requires intoxication of no matter what sort is a spurious and unsatisfying kind. The happiness that is genuinely satisfying is accompanied by the fullest exercise of our faculties and the fullest realization of the world in which we live. He talks about persecution mania. I'm sure that we all know people who present themselves as victims, ill-treated by people or life in general. Russell's view about gossiping is that it is a behavior that leads to persecution mania. We expect everybody else to feel towards us that tender love and that profound respect which we feel towards ourselves. It does not occur to us that we cannot expect others to think better of us than we think of them. And the reason this does not occur to us is that our own merits are great and obvious, whereas those of others, if they exist at all, are only visible to a very charitable eye. In my view, those who gossip and say negative things about others are in a way turning their attention away from themselves so that they don't have to face their own problems. And by saying bad things about other people, they somehow put themselves on a pedestal, proving how righteous and magnificent they are, yet nobody notices them, even themselves. Also, bad-mouthing, I think, mirrors low self-esteem. Persecution mania can occur in philanthropists too, who, doing so much good to others, find himself, herself amazed that nobody appreciates them. Russell says that our motives in doing good are seldom as pure as we imagine them to be. Love of power is insidious. It has many disguises and is often the source of the pleasure we derive from doing what we believe to be good to other people. I think giving should be unconditional and not expecting something for it. He has 4 suggestions. The first, remember that your motives are not always as altruistic as they seem to yourself. The second is, don't overestimate your own merits. The third is, don't expect others to take as much interest in you as you do yourself. The fourth is, don't imagine that most people give enough thought to you to have any special desire to persecute you. Now, the last in this part is about public opinion. This is what Lao Tzu said. Care about what other people think and you will always be their prisoner. Isn't this so true? Ask this question of yourself. Who are you seeking validation from? Really be honest. How many people have you met who is not seeking validation from somebody else? And typically, those are the closest to us we want validation from. Compete in the Olympics, so the father would turn to you and say, I'm so proud of you. I love you. But was it actually your heart's calling to compete in the Olympics? Or was validation from the father most important? We live in a society where communities and religious groups and families have very strong opinions and morals, ethics, and personal outlooks. They may differ greatly. If we are not aligned with those expectations, profound unhappiness can happen. They are those who do not care much about public opinion. Fear of public opinion, like every other form of fear, is oppressive and stunts growth. It is difficult to achieve any kind of greatness while a fear of this kind remains strong, and it is possible to acquire that freedom of spirit in which true happiness consists, for it is essential to happiness that our way of living should spring from our own deep impulses and not from the accidental tastes and desires of those who happen to be our neighbors or even our relations. Fear of immediate neighbors is no doubt less than it was, but there is a new kind of fear, namely the fear of what newspapers may say. This is quite as terrifying as anything connected with medieval witch hunts. When the newspaper chooses to make scapegoat of some perhaps quite harmless person, the results may be very terrible. Fortunately, as yet, this is a fate which most people escape through their obscurity, but as publicly gets more and more perfect in its methods, there will be an increasing danger in this novel form of social persecution. This is too grave a matter to be treated with disdain by the individual who is its victim, and whatever may be thought of the great principle of the freedom of the press. I think the line will have to be drawn more sharply than it is by the existing libel laws, and anything will have to be forbidden that makes life intolerable for innocent individuals, even if they should happen to have done or said things which, published maliciously, can cause them to become unpopular. The only ultimate cure for this evil is, however, an increase of toleration on the part of the public. The best way to increase toleration is to multiply the number of individuals who enjoy real happiness and do not therefore find their chief pleasure in the infliction of pain upon their fellow man. Now, before we turn to you all, as I started with the words of Dalai Lama, I would like to close with the words of the Buddha. A man once told Buddha, I want happiness. The Buddha replied, first remove I, that's ego. Then remove want, that is desire. And now all you are left with is happiness. So thank you for listening. I'd like to turn to our dear president, Jim, for his peace of mind. And just with regard to mind, Bertrand Russell was the one, when he was asked, what is mind? He said, no matter. What is matter? Never mind. So over to you, Jim.
Yeah, if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. Well, splendid, Gyorgyi. It reminded me of why I so enjoyed reading Bertrand Russell while I was doing my degree at Cambridge. He's quintessentially Anglo-Saxon in his approach to language in the world. So thank you for that. I will take up just very briefly the one moment when you mentioned my name around Alexander and whether it's possible for a man to be, or an individual to be happy at the expense of somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and is in the person of an Alexander or Caesar or whoever, is the happiness really a delusion, an ultimate narcissistic psychopathology? And that's a really, really profound question. And I'm not sure I fully know the answer, except that I do know, you know, Aristotle would say that true happiness arises out of the pursuit of virtue, and the refinement of virtues, at the highest level of which is friendship. And you know, so whether someone like Alexander was truly happy in the end is a very profound question. He certainly had a lot of blood on his hands. Yet he was as playful and as courageous and noble as anyone who ever marched on the field of battle, and appeared to be happy on many occasions, particularly after his great victories. But as you pointed out, the happiness was fleeting, because he was only happy until he felt the next challenge, and then the deep dissatisfaction that the Buddha talks so powerfully about in terms of samsara and suffering. You know, you could just see through his narrative would grab at his psyche and soul, and he was off to kill another 10,000 people for a momentary spasm of happiness. It's in some ways, some of the greatest people in history are cautionary tales around how elusive happiness really is. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for bringing that question. Let me just state it again for maybe some of the students to ponder. Can someone be truly happy at the expense of somebody else? Think about that. So thank you, Gyorgyi. Great question. Great question.
Thank you, Jim. Well, I think just like most things in life and in philosophy is very, very, very complex, really, because it's not just like, if you take somebody like does some things that, you know, he's causing great unhappiness to people, probably not so. So I think that the whole happiness and unhappiness is really deeply rooted in our value system. And, you know, that's another great topic to talk about, that what is valuable to you, and what I asked at the very beginning, that is happiness the most important thing in one's life? Is there is something more important, like acting in meaningful way towards others, being altruistic? You know, I read somewhere in a Hindu scholar said that make others happy and then you will be happy. So I think it's a very subjective notion and understanding, and I would actually wonder whether there is any universal definition of happiness, right? Is it just like a human thing? is a flower happy? You know, can a dog be happy? Maybe a dog gets like a big bone and is very happy. I don't know. But Mark, let us hear from you, please, and then we turn to our students.
This is such a rich conversation. Thank you so much, Gyorgyi, for pushing us in this way. And I can, it's as you pointed out in the beginning, there's so many different ways to go with it. You know, one thing I enjoyed doing in looking through this book and hearing you talk was thinking of comparisons between Bertrand Russell and his views and something that I've always found a useful guide, and that is Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah.
Where you go up, it begins with taking care of physical needs and safety and a sense of belonging and esteem. But the peak of it in his earlier versions is self-actualization. And of that, there seems to be a certain resonance with Russell. I think you alluded to the line in which he says, the happiness that is genuinely satisfying is accompanied by the fullest exercise of our faculties and the fullest realization of the world in which we live. You know, when I was a dean of students, that was how I tried to push students, was not so much in getting the grades or doing better than all their fellows. There was a great deal of competition around a place like Yale where I was, and some other places I've been. But really what was most satisfying for them personally in order to develop themselves. And and this is just one question I want to leave you with. For Maslow, that itself had its limitations. He hit a point where the self-actualization was not, he didn't think quite enough. And where it went beyond that, I'm interested in your take on this, because for him, where it went beyond that was towards the transpersonal, or towards the spiritual. That if you did go deep enough into the self that was being actualized, you would hit a realization, a greater realization of what was Bertrand Russell's term, the realization of the world around us, or I would like to say the context around us, which may push us in a more spiritual direction than Bertrand Russell was at least rhetorically willing to go. He does, you know, as all of us being part of our times, and he emphasizes the value of the rational, but there is a point in which we may feel like the rational is not enough, and there are other exercises, other faculties of our own that need to kick in before we are fully realized, and that realization means some sense of connection with a broader spiritual world. So that's perhaps a vague articulation of thoughts that are profounder than any of us could go in at the moment. But I'm interested in any thoughts you might have about the limitations of the rational in determining happiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I'm a Buddhist practitioner, so I try to stay away from the rational and go into the experiential. And I read this book 15 years ago, and that particular part that I pointed to, that about the worry and the fear, that really remained in my psyche since then. And it's actually a really good practice, I think, to think that when we're really afraid of anything in our lives, let's just kind of like go through that sequence, really see that what is the worst that can happen. And that is actually, in a sense, you are accessing your unconscious, and at the same time your conscious influencing your unconscious. So in a sense that will turn and will influence your conscious, so you will be calmer, and you will realize that whatever the worst thing that can happen is actually not too bad. And I do say this to people that, well, what is the worst thing that can happen to somebody's life? That you're going to die? You die physically, but you will be born again. Okay, not in the same body and probably not with the same name, but your soul or your consciousness or whatever it is, it kind of like continues. So there's so many very important elements in this book, one of which Russell points to is that really take the attention away from the ego, from that you are so important in every kind of like scenario. No, the world is going to still spin around and the whole cosmos is going to go through its evolution, whether you're going to do this or that or not, and so forth. Of course, you are important in a sense, but in a sense that stop your worrying, because it is actually a bad energy. So nowadays, we have those tools that probably in 1961, when he wrote this book, they didn't have extensively, i.e. meditation and mindfulness and conscious practices and so forth. So you can really bring your attention away from that egocentric center point and take a really higher vista point and observe the whole situation from there. So yeah, so that's my way of kind of like, or my answer to you, as you know.
Yeah.
I hope it is satisfactory, but I'd like to turn to some of our listeners. Is there anybody who would like to come first, or who is there? Linda White. Would you like to say something? What's your point of view on happiness and unhappiness?
Well, you kind of caught me off guard. I was very engaged in what I was listening to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I guess I will share my train of thought. It was a little bit different. You know, when you reference the Buddhist, my thinking was going more, you know, with the rational mind, the psychological versus the transpersonal and the experiential. And I was kind of chewing on, you know, the value of process within that, and then values. And so those were kind of the threads from the conversation of, you know, our values, our morals, and the different places or movements within us, from the rational, from the heart-centered, from the transpersonal. So I was just kind of feeling into all of that. So when you asked the question, I wasn't quite in my rational mind.
It's great.
I was really kind of feeling. And then also, I'm really struck by, I had also gone to that this was written in 1961 and what was happening in the world at that time, and also what's happening in the world. And of course, you know, with where we are today, looking at Hitler and Trump, you know, and just kind of looking at these juxtapositions of movements and energy within individuals and within culture, and how we've been searching for a long time at making meaning of all this. Yeah, so just kind of a stream of conscience there of thoughts.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this whole notion of happiness, isn't it? That we use this word so often, and when we really think about that, what is really happiness? What makes us happy, right? And we will actually discuss the happiness part next time. So today I really wanted to center on the what makes us unhappy, which is obviously more than just what Russell wrote about.
I did write down something. Let me just, there was a note that I put down here, just the relationship between happiness and peace of mind, you know, the content heart, you know, by doing the next right thing, you know, regardless of the consequences, really is what brings happiness. And some of the measures of that, you know, do we have peace of mind? I love that you brought the book in about sleep, you know, because if we really have a peaceful mind and a peaceful heart, you know, typically we have deep sleep, you know, the absence of disturbance. And so stillness comes into that too. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I can see that Steve would like to share his thoughts with us. Welcome, Steve, and thank you, Linda, very much.
I have two things. First of all, clarification. I heard twice that say the book was published in 1961. In the edition that I have, it says it was first published in 1930. And so that's confusing to me.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was as a paper, but this book, what I have, was published in 1961.
Okay, that's what I had said. First published by UN Books. Secondly, we finally got to a topic of something that I feel like I know something about, and that is laughter, humor, happiness. Having done pretty much extensive research into this area, including it in my DMin dissertation and so forth, I feel pretty much excited that we're in a topic that I know something about. To respond to Dr. Jim's question about can someone be truly happy at the expense of someone else, Sigmund Freud said that we laugh at someone because we feel equal or superior to them when we see something. So that's why we laugh at Lucy when we see her stomping on those grapes, is because we would never do anything that stupid. And so we feel equal or superior to who she is or what she is doing. I'm really concerned about chapter 4 when you talked about boredom. I'm really not comfortable. Maybe it was because where I grew up in the South during the 40s and 50s. Be interesting to see what creativity has to do with happiness also, because it was very easy for me to be creative and do things that I did not need to have some kind of outside stimulus, but to enjoy life when there was nothing to do, that I was still pretty much happy with things going on. My son was that way too. When he was growing up and we would send him to his room for something that he did, he would, first of all, if he didn't have a book to read, he would take the little bitty ends of his shoelaces, and I don't remember what those are technically called, but he would let those things talk to each other, and he would do a whole kind of play with just those tips of his shoestrings talking to one another. And I think whether osmosis or DNA or whatever it is about his life, I think that I think he is also an embodiment of happiness in what he did. And then also in chapter 8 on this persecution area, looking at when things were written, when he wrote this in 1930, you look as was said earlier about what was going on then. If you look at the musicals that were being, or the music that was being written, it was, on the sunny side of the street about, life as good as you can get it and so forth. So I think this is part of a movement that was going on then. But part, again, growing up in the South, the concept of white privilege was very real to me as I was growing up. And I don't think he didn't spoke to that. And yet I think that is another kind of persecution that I, as a persecutor, persecuted the people of color, whereas the people of color response to that is completely different because I was white and privileged at that point. So I'll stop there and quit preaching to you and let you all respond to me if you need to.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's always wonderful to hear from you and see you. Well, I agree with what you, there's so many things in a book that I don't agree with. But as I mentioned to you, this book is a compilation of Russell's observation and experiences. With regard to creativity and boredom, I so agree with you. Creativity plays a huge part in the antidote of boredom. And as you're speaking, I was actually thinking about my dad. He lost his parents in the Second World War, and his grandmother was bringing him up, and they were living in a country and they really had nothing. And he said, my dad said that he never had any toys. That the chicken and the cockroaches and the pig, they all became his friends because there was nothing else to play with, really. So it is either within yourself you find what excites you, and that's creativity, really. But also at the same time that upbringing and nurturing plays a huge part in inducing that creativity. I was brought up in a communist country where, especially towards my sister and I, so we weren't allowed to go out much. So that little part I was reading to you was very similar to my life, that you stay in the house and you have these family dinners and very boring. And my creativity was always coming from or channeled to books. I have been and still am really an avid reader, because I could be just entertain myself greatly. So, but my dad helped me a lot because he was the one who gave me lots of books. So just wanted to bring up like two examples that for sure that I think parents and friends can help you a lot in terms of like steering you in terms of your direction, but also your inner creativity. And unfortunately, we're missing some very conscious guidance. Hence, there's so many people are directing themselves to the excessive of excitement, whatever be that there is drugs or alcohol, or they, I think, not really favoring conscious evolution. It is a huge topic. It really is a huge topic, but it's wonderful that it ignites different things within you and in Lyndon, in Jim and Mark and all those who are listening. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate your contribution to our call. Laura, I can see you there. Please share your thoughts and feelings with us.
Yeah, this is my husband, Mick.
Hi, great to meet you.
Really enjoying the book. So I'm very struck by the transpersonal aspect here, and I feel that is the cutting edge for our next evolution. That's certainly where my interest, my PhD lies, in the experiencing that movement in ourself that is beyond self, but it includes self, but not as other. So it dovetails quite a lot with where Russell's pointing, in his rational way. And this is experiential. Like, I feel it really grounds itself once that intelligence, because it's an intelligence, it's a movement and an intelligence. I think once it begins to inform us, if we're able to listen to it, it's an experience in the body and in the mind, and it actually is an experience of profound connection. And I believe that's what releases us from the cramp of the separate self that has to achieve its own happiness. It's just a very different paradigm that I feel we're dipping into. I can feel it around with certain people when they're talking. They may not verbalize it this way or the way I'm doing it, but they're entering an edge of, wow, it's kind of us, not me or them. There's a movement happening. That's how I'm feeling it. And so I'm calling it transpersonal, but there may be other names for it.
So where do you find happiness in the transpersonal?
I believe when we're, just sitting together. I just had an example during Remembrance Day here. It ended up that there were 6 of us, my high school buddies. We've known each other a very long time, and we had a pajama party on Remembrance Day. It just turned out that's when everyone could meet at my house here. And we sat outside. They were ringing the bells at sunset, and we were all interested in going to hear this. So we just sat outside the house, like you could hear it in the neighborhood. And there was a real sense of quiet. We were there for like 20 to 25 minutes. And we were sharing something there, and this nonverbal, just listening to the bells and seeing like our forefathers and the war. And it was just a beautiful shared experience where that's an example of that. And it happens when we share something together and we're aware we're sharing it together. Because very often we do share life together. I share life with my husband. I share life with, my colleagues. I share life. Yeah. But if I'm not aware that I'm sharing, then I'm missing out. Yeah. That it is shared. The fact that it is shared. It isn't all about me.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to say, that what what Bertrand Russell was saying, that the preoccupation of oneself, once you really turn the table and you focus your attention when you are with a group of your friends or family, your attention is really not about yourself and how great you are, how nice your hair is, or what a wonderful food you cook. It's really about the others. You focus your attention there. So actually the energy goes in a different direction. And that's really maybe what creates that coherent energy field around you, that you are aligned with, and maybe that alignment with others who feel the same way, and brings you that joy, because that joy is really probably about that happiness, and we appreciate happiness or that momentarily state of being, because we know that it's not going to last, and that's totally okay, because the only way we appreciate things is when we don't have it. So it is kind of like a dichotomy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Thank you so much for joining. It's wonderful to see you both. Thank you.
Gyorgyi, I'd like to add a comment here before we get Dr. Macquarie. Laura, thank you so much. Your comment made me think of something that was told to me before the birth of my first child. I was talking with another father, and I was asking him, "Oh, what is it like to be a father?" And he made a statement that I've never forgotten. He says, "Well, what you learn is that parents are only as happy as their unhappiest child."
Mm.
And I thought, whoa. And you know, it's true. I can say, with my oldest son being 28 years old, and my second son, 6 or something, that a parent is only as happy as his unhappiest child. So this collective nature of happiness, I think, is a very, very profound point that you're making, and Gyorgyi as well. And that goes back to your question: can you really be happy at the expense of another? Can you really be happy? This is the bodhisattva, right? Can you really feel truly liberated when one other person in the entire universe is still unenlightened? And the Buddhists say, no, you can't. Therefore, you spend all your waking enlightened time, moments, working toward the enlightenment of us all. And that's a beautiful, beautiful expansion of the notion of happiness. It is personal, but ultimately even the personal is dependent on the communal. So thank you. I just wanted to underscore, that was a beautiful point, beautifully put. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Dave, over to you.
It's a fascinating discussion, and I would like to add, to make a distinction between this transient positivity that we call happiness as an emotional state, as compared to I'll use Ken Wilber's statement, the stage of happiness, which is an ongoing, at least for me, an ongoing peacefulness with what life offers. And it's easy to fuzz the two, because there's certainly an overlap. As a therapist, as you know, I was a therapist for 25 years. I saw people becoming happy when they did their own personal work, and in some level resolved the emotional difficulties that they came into life with, and were then able to be more connected to others. So there is that overlap with the transpersonal. And I would even go so far, certainly in my current understanding, that there's probably no individuality. It's all transpersonal at some level. And within that, my working definition of happiness is wanting what you get. Not getting what you want, but wanting what you get. And again, at that personal level, as I think of the what I would call the insanity of our species, as we attempt to deal with global warming and the threat of threat of nuclear war and such, I don't personally think it's possible to be happy when we have this incredible discordance within our society. But yet at the individual level, I can have many peak moments of just being absolutely joyous. And, and then, picking up what Steve was talking about with laughter. And in particular, I'm a teacher of laughter yoga. So there's many overlaps there. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And so agree with every word you said. I think it is really true that we all have to respond to our heart's calling. And what Russell referred to as well, that don't do things for the other's sake or for the appraisal or the definition of somebody else, because it is you who defines yourself, not anybody else. So I think it is when you really become happy, when you follow your heart's desire. I think that's when you really are aligned with your own calling, and this is what we all do at Ubiquity. I think it's a very altruistic organization, and we're not doing it for the sake of money, but we really are joyous and there's a happy bunch of people because we feel that we're doing something really, really good for society. So I think that's really important what you were saying and interesting that Russell was saying as well. And that's where I think that he was a spiritual person. Like he kept saying that being altruistic, and that's what the Asians were about as well. It's not really about you, it's like what you can do to others, really. How can you help others? So we really need to think about that and really lead by example. I'd like to actually see if Julia or Emma would like to share their thoughts with us. Emma, are you there?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I did, thank you. I did go ahead and read the total book.
Wow.
I didn't want to end at the first part, but I did go ahead to the end. And the last paragraph actually very much spoke to me. I don't know if it's okay to go ahead, but that very much answers, I think, a lot of questions for me.
Emma, is it the last paragraph in the first section about the unhappiness? Because if it is the last part of the book, then let's discuss it next time. I really want to focus on the first part, all these little segments of what Russell thought make us unhappy.
It is. I won't go ahead. But it does, it helps me to certainly read the first part and then certainly then read the second part. It does very much tie things together. And in terms of the Buddhist way of looking at things and connection, I think Bertrand Russell very much does bring things together in that second part. So it was very hopeful to me. And seeing again, I'm looking at the chapter 10, is happiness still possible? And again, this goes to the next section, and that was very much important to me to see that he does then bring it together. But thank you for everyone for comments this time.
Thank you.
I very much enjoyed it. Thanks.
Emma, can I ask you a question? What makes you happy?
When I'm in meditation,
mm-hmm.
and I'm very much connected with myself, but also connected with the all. I'm in a very happy place. So that connection with self, and then as I expand, as all is expanded, as it's very hard to put into words, but when I'm in that place of connectedness with all, that's very much happiness to me.
Yeah, and do you agree with Russell's point of views about the fatigue and the competition and all these points, that those are the soul issues of causing unhappiness? Do you think there is something even deeper?
I think I'm because I work on many levels, as I'm sure many of us do on the call. One of the levels is the Bertrand Russell level, if you will, and within that he is trying to work on many different levels. Again, I believe Mark had mentioned that the spiritual, and I'm not sure how to conceptualize that in the first part of things of the book, but in the second part, that would be included. And
absolutely.
So the spiritual, if I can even call it that, is very much part of connection and part of happiness.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Well, we can't wait to hear from you in December, so you could bring in all your happy notions. Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us. Julia, what do you think?
Yeah, so as you know, I joined the course somewhat late, and I've been completing all the books. So this book, I'm only into the 3rd chapter, so I'm just going to confess that up front. And as you know, I've also studied quite a bit of positive psychology, so I've read so many books with the word happiness in the title. And I was, perhaps because I just read Alexander and Caesar, I looked at the title and thought, Conquest of Happiness. Interesting choice. Russell seems to be turning from a culture that has pretty much dominated us in the past few thousand years. And you can see vestiges of the older culture, the Western culture, and some new ideas, at least new for the West. For the question about what causes unhappiness, I don't know if this is a satisfying answer, but neuroscientists tell us that the human brain has a natural bias towards negativity, and that it probably kept us alive. And so left in the wild, so to speak, we all tend to be unhappy. Even those of us who have pretty much everything we want, having the barista mess up our coffee might ruin our mornings, because the better your life gets, the more you focus on the little things that still aren't quite right. There's this tantalizing idea that there might be neuroplasticity, that maybe you could change your brain permanently and have a happier brain. And there are a lot of people teaching it, but it seems like they haven't really proven that what they're doing quite works. It seems that what's needed is not so much you do this stuff and then your brain is different, but rather that you're doing it on a day-to-day basis. So the practices of Buddhism, for instance, do seem to help people feel happier. And to your question of like, when have you been happy? When I thought about it, I thought sustained happiness for more than, an afternoon or something like that. I would say probably on Buddhist retreats. There's lots of love and non-judgment and togetherness, and there is a resonance or entrainment that makes it possible to feel happy. And the happiness is very much, for me at least, connected to love, but at those times, it's not love for anybody or anything, and it's not even love from anybody or anything. It's just love. It's just there. And so for me, that's the experience of it. Not sure if I've answered your question.
Absolutely. You put it so well. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I resonate with what you said. And it is really, we are not just about our brain. In fact, actually, our brain is the only organ in our body that is divided. Everything else is just like, one organ. The brain is divided. And in fact, it is truly divided. And if you want to read a really great book about, it's only around 450 pages, the Maggie Christ's book, A Master and His a Mystery. It is really fantastic that how our brain works, but we are not just about our brain, and we much more should be heart-centered than brain-centered, and everything is connection, so it is not just our brain, our heart, everything talks to each other. In fact, even more our consciousness in this personal energy field we have. And also this society we have been being brought up in the really talking about the Western hemisphere, this wanting to wanting, not enjoying to enjoy, right? It's like it's this possession really, that once we have it, then we're happy. What I mentioned at the beginning, that this if and then scenario. I do myself feel maybe I tend not to use happiness anymore and being more content. And if I'm talking about a state, if I'm doing about a movement or talking about a movement, I would question myself, that is this meaningful? Is this meaningful to anybody or any kind of like group of people or to the wide world? So, and this is what I'm going to mention next time we speak, that meaning and happiness, how are they balanced? And is actually doing meaningful things, like is meaning, is it a deeper notion, is a deeper entity within us, and we're striving for this like very short feeling of happiness, that, and we're doing so much for it. It's really, really incredible. That is it at any point really? Like, that's why I asked at the beginning, is it an abstraction of the mind? Are we actually running after something that we can never catch, we can never have, right? Is it about having or experiencing? So yeah, there are lots of questions, lots of questions, but now we're getting to the close, and I kind of have an intuitive feeling that Jim Garrison would like to say a few more words. Thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julia, Emma, and Mark, and Laura, and others, David. Very, very rich discussion. We'll meet again next month on the second Tuesday, wherein Gyorgyi will conclude with the second half of the book. And in the meantime, let us ponder the nature of happiness and some of the factors in our lives that keep us from being happy for most people most of the time. It's quite an extraordinary thing. Happiness is a state of mind, and our minds are what keeps us from being happy most of the time. It's a great paradox. And Gyorgyi has seeded some of the deepest questions I've ever encountered about the nature of happiness. So, Dr. Szabo, hats off to you. Excellent lecture, and we'll see you in about a month's time. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.